He's the great Al Michaels, NBC Sports, and he joins us on the program. Uh, you know what? When I saw the quotes you had with Pat Summerall, it just brought back that feeling of when I'm listening to a game and what it meant when I tuned in and I heard his voice. He was economically great. And I think you called him a minimalist, but, with the words. It's get to the point and then let John Madden come in. But if you could, I guess, talk about that style of what Pat had and how it set up John Madden to be as great as he was.
DP, he was soothing. He was a very, as I put it to somebody yesterday, a very comfortable listen. I remember talking to Pat years ago about Ray Scott. Ray Scott was the voice of the big NFL games in the 60s and early 70s, and Ray was assigned to a lot of the Packer games during the Lombardi era. And people would always refer to Scott as a minimalist, as a guy who, when you imitate Ray Scott, you go star, dollar, touchdown. And that's pretty much the way that Ray did the game. And Pat sort of picked it up in the next generation when he came into broadcasting. That was pretty much the style. And what Ray Scott did, is he almost made it seem as if it was a religious experience. This is when the NFL is becoming as big as the NFL has become. At the outset, you were economical. Remember, too, the big thing here, Dan, is that the technology has changed so drastically. When Ray Scott is calling games the way he did, you had very few cameras, and the replays were just the replay of what you just saw on your television set. There were very few isolated cameras, and when that came into being, it sort of changed the rhythm of the game and the dynamic of the game, and people began to know more about the game. So it became a little more difficult to do it in that manner. But Pat started out that way. It was working extremely well. And then when he gets together with John, it was the yin and yang of the two of those men who had very disparate styles, but the melding was almost perfect. So when you think about them as a combination, it's tremendous. It's an interesting thing here, Dan. You in those years, in the Scott and in early Summerall years, you'd almost, how do I put this, croon the game. There's a singer that's known as a crooner. You'd go to, and again, it's not that I'm dating myself, but in those years you had somebody like Perry Como or maybe Bing Crosby, and it was a soothing style. And then 20, 25 years later, we went to heavy metal, we went to Metallica. So not that you had to announce the game that way. There's probably a middle ground here. But I think that's how the evolvement in my mind plays out. And, Pat started out that way. I think he was influenced by Ray, and, of course, he had a phenomenal career and a tremendous set of pipes.
Well, it's also with Tom Brookshire as well, and then he went with John Madden. But I'm also looking at when did the play-by-play guy become a personality? Because the analyst was the personality. Now we have our play-by-play guys who are just as popular as the analyst is.
I guess to some degree that's probably true, but I think it's more of a partnership. It's more of a back and forth. I think many years ago there was a delineation. Play-by-play guy does this, analyst does this, and never the twain shall meet. But I can't remember exactly when the back and forth started. Also, when we're talking about this, and I know I heard you mention this earlier in the show today about a three-man booth, and I know a lot about that because I worked with Frank Gifford and Dan Dierdorf for a lot of years. That is a completely different dynamic. That's totally different. And remember, you have the influence of Cosell here, too. There was never an announcer who had done a game like Cosell when Cosell does Monday Night Football, which becomes the first, primetime major television show, sports television show. And so that helped to change everything as well. So you had that going on with Monday Night. You had Pat, who was the descendant of the Ray Scott style. Then you've got, the 80s and 90s coming into play. Then you've got technology coming into play. So I think it's all evolved. But the great thing about Pat is through the years, it was a soothing, melodic style, and it was something that you just sat back in your chair and you just loved listening to him.
He's Al Michaels, NBC Sports, joining us. Dan Patrick Show. Speaking of NBC Sports, we have the season opener with the NFL. Normally, we would be going to Baltimore since they won the Super Bowl, but with the conflict in scheduling with the Orioles, they're going to be on the road maybe in Denver. Where do you think we're opening up that first game since the schedule's released tomorrow, I believe?
Well, you look at if it is Baltimore, if it's a Baltimore road game, their top two road games, I guess, in terms of attractiveness would be at Denver, obviously, a rematch of that phenomenal playoff game last year, or at Pittsburgh. I mean, do you open up with a divisional game, or do you wait for later in the season to play the Baltimore-Pittsburgh game? I'm as curious as you are. I mean, I've been trying to keep my ear to the ground, but I'm hearing no rumblings right now. Are you?
I thought it was going to be that you wouldn't have Baltimore open up against the Steelers, a divisional rival, that it would be Denver, but then maybe another network is involved in this and saying, wait a minute, you're going to give away a marquee game
Right.
to start the season. So I think there's a tug of war going on, but I would feel like Baltimore in Denver to open up the season would be a nice way to christen this year.
Well, I mean, the schedule is like a Rubik's Cube, and I know Howard Katz, who I've known for a million years, is deeply involved in that, and it just seems so simple. People say, well, you know who's playing who, so why can't you just put some dates together? But they've done a masterful job through the years figuring out how to play the games at the most opportune times to get the biggest ratings, to get the best of the television revenue,
But
as we all know.
Help me with this, though, Al, because every time a schedule comes out, I'll get people who say, boy, the NFL took care of you, or, boy, the NFL, look at the Monday night games that ESPN got. Does the league play favorites, consciously or subconsciously, when they're handing out the schedule?
I would think they do, to the extent that if you're the National Football League, don't you want to play your best games in a national window? So in other words, it would either be Sunday night, it would be Monday night, or it would be the second half of a Sunday doubleheader. I remember, years ago, again, when I think this is 1993, I believe, was the year that Joe Montana got traded from San Francisco to Kansas City, and it was huge. And here comes Steve Young, and he's finally going to get his shot with the 49ers, and obviously he made the most of that over the next couple of years. And Joe goes to Kansas City, so looking at the schedule at the end of the prior year, I'm looking at this thing going, wow, San Francisco plays at Kansas City. What a great game for, at that time I'm on Monday Night Football, so I'm sure it's going to be the Monday night game. For some crazy reason, it wound up as like a number 3 regional in the early afternoon window.
Wow.
On Sunday in week 2, and I'm thinking, this is crazy. So I think at that point the league said, wait a second, we've got to do a better job making sure we position these games in the right place and at the right time. And I think the league's done a really good job of that. Now we have the flex schedule as well. And look, they have a lot of partners here. They've got ESPN, they've got CBS, they've got Fox, they've got us, and they've got themselves too. I mean, the NFL Network. So it's a Rubik's Cube is what Howard's working with here.
Good to visit with you as always, Al. Appreciate it, and see you soon.
I will see you soon. Take care, buddy.
All right, buddy. Al Michaels, NBC Sports.